Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to a conversation with Cometan. We're on, of course, season 2 still, and this is episode 18. This is actually a bonus episode. This episode has been sort of organized in the last few days. So this is a bit of a treat actually, and especially a treat for me because we are here with Professor Michael York today, who I've known for quite I got in contact with him and I wanted to really talk to him about all things astronomy and space and religion and all these intersecting topics that have brought us together, I suppose. So thank you for joining us today. And please just, I suppose, where I'd like to begin is what got you interested in this particular field, I suppose, is the first question.
That's a question to me.
Question to you.
Okay. What got me interested in this field? I knew Jack Fontaine and Ray Unger, who were two astrologers who lived in Laguna Beach,
Right.
in California, and they influenced me very strongly in that they were astrologers and they claimed that astrology was a science.
Okay.
And so when I went for my master's degree at San Francisco State, my area was sociology, or actually, sociology of religion. And actually it was international relations, but that all became under we all had to take what I always call it a scientific methodology brainwashing course.
Right.
And Carlo Lastrucci was the instructor. And I put it to him, I said, well, what about astrology? Can astrology be considered a science? Because it's based empirically.
Yeah.
And he said, absolutely. And so that helped me buy into the whole scientific methodology approach to things. It was always interesting. The historian majors and the geography majors were also required to take this course. They could never pass it.
Right.
They never could understand the subjective nature of both history and geography. They always were excused and they were not penalized by that, but it was an interesting phenomenon. So, all right, now I am teaching in BASPA, and my graduate student, I'm the supervisor of Nick Campion, whom you have read.
Yes.
And unbeknownst to me, I was actually under a research fellowship. The funding was running out. And Nick went to the administration. I didn't know anything about this, but he had money behind him, and he wanted to set up a Sophia Center for the Study of Astrology, with me being the director of this. And anyhow, I got that position. But my whole argument was that I was interested in astrology from a sociological point of view.
Yes.
I said, we're not going to try to prove astrology one way or the other. We're going to look at how people are influenced by their beliefs in astrology. And the classic example would be India postponed its original day of creation because the stars weren't right. So they changed their inception date. Now, of course, almost all the students were astrologers. And it became a real awakening for me because I realized that they don't approach astrology as a science. They hated what I was making them do. And they did it fairly well, but it was not what they really wanted to do. And I did have a few non-astrologers, and they had one was a woman who worked in the police department, and she did a whole study on the increase of calls they would get at the full moon. Okay. And that was, to me, was really fascinating. But anyhow, I realized now, of course, I have become a professor. What is my full title? I'm professor of cultural astronomy and astrology.
Yes.
And I realized that for most astrologers, astrology is really Platonic in the sense that they define the issues and then apply their definitions, but they're not empirically. I mean, the empirical studies of astrology have been very meager and not overly successful. Doesn't mean that they might not be able to be established at some point. But so anyhow, that's my interest.
Brilliant.
I don't consider myself an astrologer,
Okay.
but I am professor of astrology.
That's brilliant, though. Yeah. I suppose the first time that I came across you was your 2019 TED Talk. I think that was the first time I came across your work, because on cultural astronomy, that was sort of the two key words that caught my attention. And so at that time, I was sort of in the depths of my theories about astronomy's role in the development of religion. So, of course, what you had to say about cultural astronomy was definitely relevant to my dissertation and the work that I was doing. But I suppose one question I did want to ask you was, I suppose throughout all the research that you've done so far, what is sort of you could say, what is the fundamental assertion that you can make about astrology? What can you tell us about, what is the most important thing you could say, or the main assertion that you can assert?
Well, I was often asked why astrology, and my immediate retort was that there's a lot of people that are interested in it.
Yes.
One, and secondly, a number of astrologers somehow are very rich. They seem to be able to know, using their methodologies, know how to invest, when to invest, and so forth. So those are 2 points that are hard to argue with. But I find overall, astrology is a vernacular language. I come out of the whole counterculture tradition in San Francisco, and it was really, astrology was a lingua franca for us. Before we would even ask somebody's name, we would ask, what sign are you?
Yeah.
And as soon as you identified by sign, then there was a whole exchange of information automatically conveyed, and then you could take it from there. And so that was fascinating, just again from a purely sociological point of view.
Yes.
And the fact that astrology is so much part of popular culture, it works in many, many different ways for many different people, but it seems to have a following. So again, sociologically, that becomes something, a thing of interest.
Definitely. One thing, I suppose, again, the other aspect, of course, of your work is this sort of title of cultural astronomy, which, of course, I'm aware of what that is, but maybe some people aren't. So can you just sort of give us a quick understanding of what that actually means? Because we also have this phrase of ethno-astronomy, don't we? So are they sort of the similar thing? Because I've seen
I would think they, it's a very broad term, and it's how cultures relate to the heavens, how they interpret the heavens, how they feel that they're influenced by astronomical configurations, and then of course your whole the whole idea of sacred sites. I forget, Nick has a wonderful term and I can't think of it right now, but the placement of places like Stonehenge and Newgrange, and the orientation towards the heavens of these ancient sacred sites. So all that whole gamut would be, broadly speaking, cultural astronomy.
Yeah. With my research that I conducted, I was looking at because I've had experiences and I've felt things when I've looked up at the stars since I was about 15 years old, and in a very serious way, in a very sort of contemplative way. And so the way I got into this area was I sort of looked around and said, well, I can't be the only person who's felt these things, and I can't be certainly the first. So, of course, I then went back into history, deep history, prehistory, and found that, you know, human beings have been looking up at the night sky, of course, since prehistoric times. And that was the basis of my whole master's dissertation. And of course, now I've developed what I call the Astronic Tradition, because I'm a scholar of religion. And so when I see the Abrahamic tradition, the Dharmic tradition, and the Chinese tradition, I thought, well, there's definitely enough lineage here to make a tradition that is based on astronomical religion, based on astronomical beliefs. Of course, astrology is definitely part of that to some degree. I had a man on last year, a lecture on last year. We were discussing whether astrology is a religion. That continues to be an interesting debate. Of course, quite controversial at sometimes, you know, that type of statement to astrologers themselves. But I suppose what I wanted to ask you was, is your focus really more on the contemporary rather than sort of that deeper history where my research seems to have gone? Are you more interested in the sort of what's happening here and now, essentially, with regards to astrology? Or
Yeah, all right, yes. I'm very much interested in what is happening now,
yes,
and how people's belief systems, how those belief systems orient them to what do they consider the problems, what do they consider the issues to be, how do they approach it, and so forth. Um, but all right, so I have a different understanding of the broad religious classifications than you do. We probably would agree on the Abrahamic,
right,
and I think we probably agree on the Dharmic. But I consider secularism also as a religious option, in
yes,
the sense that I think I sent you my definition of
yes,
religion. Um, Whereas it's a take on this world, on the supernatural and humanity, that each of the positions take some take on it. So, for instance, the secular denies the supernatural, but it's taking a position on it. So it's not considered really religious, but it's a kind of religious uh, orientation, so to speak. Your dharmic tends to deny the reality of the world. It's an illusion. All right, but again, it's taking a position on it. Now, the category that where we would probably most disagree with is on paganism. I see paganism as basically the fourth. I basically consider the four types. I sometimes will consider what I've called um, galactinism or something like that, which I think would kind of overlap with you. But I think your astronism uh, is probably more secular. It would probably fall, in my understanding, more into but these are all ideal types. So these are not strict categories or classifications. Any given religion is maybe going to conform more to one of those four, but it's going to overlap to some degree with the others as well.
yeah,
And again, paganism has dharmic qualities.
yes,
Sometimes it is Abrahamic, and it certainly has a very, very strong secular
yeah.
orientation as well. And so I see that with your astronism as well, that it can bleed into paganism, although I think the way you formulate it is more secular.
Yeah, you're right. Yes. And of course, you know, I definitely see myself and people around me who identify as astronist as sort of, yeah, the continuation really of this prehistoric tradition. That's what I see it as. I see,
Mm-hmm.
and this is how it's sort of formed really is, you know, okay, we can look back into prehistory, we can look at all the rock art, and we've got all these brilliant specimens, and I really do feel connected to those. I really do feel like we're on the same path. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
we look up at the night sky, and that is our focus. That is our primary environment of of interest of that's where we think the answers are, essentially. So yes, I do. I mean, there'll always be little elements that we won't always agree on, but I think, yeah, I would agree that astronism is more of the select secular variety,
Mhm.
you know, but it is very new still. I founded it in 2013, so it's still not a long time,
Yeah.
and it's developing. It's in its infancy. Sometimes we're still deciding, is it a religion, is it a philosophy? You know, these debates continue, you know. So of course, hopefully as time goes on, things will become more clarified, things will become more clear
All
to
right.
audiences. But
How do you see the impact on contemporary society with the way that the heavens are being occluded by uh, urban lighting and so forth? And I mean, and
oh,
what you're talking about was the past. And I
yes,
mean, like when you're away from all of that, the heavens are
yes,
absolutely stunning. But
yes,
we don't have that in the city.
no.
And
Well, I think it's a metaphor really for the closed, the fact that people are closed off to the astronomical world in that more deeper philosophical religious way. So I think that the lack of visibility of the night sky is certainly a metaphor for that really in this modern society we only, or majority of us, think about what's right in front of us rather than what is millions of miles away up above us. So it is a metaphor for that, and that's what I want to try and change. I want to try and get people to look up at the night sky once more, maybe like we did in earlier
if
time.
they could just turn off the lights for, a couple of hours at night, that
Yeah,
would be that
yeah.
would be wonderful.
Yeah, that's what my goal is, to try and promote. You know, not to be sort of not to be silly. You know, of course, life still has to go on, but just to make that time to look up at the night sky. That I don't think people do enough of that.
All
In
right.
life. You know, it's my endless endeavor. I always call it is this sort of getting people to look up, you know.
All right.
Um,
There's an overlap, or there's two things there. There's an overlap with paganism, what you've just said, but there's also it's almost Abrahamic danger in that, whereas the Abrahamic thing is looking to the next life. It's not focusing on the here and now, which with paganism and most secular things is very much this is it, and this is where we focus. And you're not really focusing the way you're saying it right now on here and now. You're looking way out there. So that's one thing. But the pagan overlap is uh, pagans very much want to have that moment of contemplation. We tend to want to pull away from the urban environment, find some quiet place in the country, find a special tree or a spring or something where we can see the heavens, see the stars, but not be impacted by contemporary urban life, so to speak. So in that sense, there's a similarity between your ascetism and a pagan endeavor.
yes, definitely, and of course we do share as well that's that sense of focus. Well, we call it cosmocentrism because that's our worldview. That's how we understand reality is by looking up at the night sky. That is our reality. That is our future, really. So we're very sort of future focused as well. We're very much dependent on the ideas of space exploration, that
Mm-hmm.
being the destiny of humanity, that being the sort of fundamental reason as to why we are here. So yes, very much sort of oriented up, but also oriented sort of future looking in many ways. But I suppose as well, yes, there is that overlap with paganism. I've always tried to distinguish them from in my work. I've always tried, I really want to try and create a distinct identity from paganism, just in terms of religious scholarship, just because I think it is a separate thing. I do believe that anything that is astronomical, I do see it as being better placed under this category of astronic or astronist, to be honest. Because there's a heck of a lot within paganism, of course, and not all of that is astronomical in theme. A lot of it is, but not all of it. So I've always tried to distinguish the two. Maybe that will go out of my hands and it will be classified as part of paganism. I can't control that, but I've always tried to create that sort of distinct identity for us astronists.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody goes for a distinct identity, and there is no real accepted definition or explanation of what paganism is. It tends to be very nature oriented, but not exclusively again. And there's no hierarchy, there's no concrete membership, there's no pope. So there's no one who can say you are or you're not pagan. It's always up to the individual who declares a pagan identity.
Yeah, would you say that there's really no sense of salvation within paganism? Because definitely there is for astronism. We have that, we sort of tie salvation, this concept of being saved, with outer space, that we can save ourselves by going up into outer space, that will be our making in a way. So would you say that there's not much of that really in paganism, because it's more of a Christian idea, isn't it? This idea of being saved.
I see that more as a Christian concept. Salvation, I mean, of course, it comes from a basis of a word meaning health. And so that's very pagan. The idea of wholesome, being holistic, healthy, being part of the whole, recognizing the whole, endorsing the whole. And that, of course, includes the heavens. But where you call yourself cosmocentric, we would tend to call ourselves geocentric as pagans.
That's where we depart.
But it's only because this is where we live, and this is where we are, and this is our mother planet. And it's from here that we can look out. But pagans, they are looking for the restoration of the earth and the environment, the restoration of natural balance.
Yes.
And so they're very focused on the environment and ecological issues, because that's what we're dealing with. And of course, what's happening now is that we're really cluttering up our skies with all kinds of satellites and satellite pieces now. I don't know if you heard I think it was Radio 4 this morning, where they were discussing the 3 billionaires and their attempts to get out in space. But what was said, which was interesting, was that these men, first of all, they have the funding, and they're jumping the gun over the governments, and they see the future of technology as being space oriented, where it won't have the same carbon impact on the Earth that our current technologies do. And so that's where they're headed. And there's something lovely about that, but at the same time, I also see the heavens being again further occluded by, if we get everything out there, we're going to again be missing the natural beauty.
Yes, and that's something that I continuously try to. Oftentimes, I fail at that sometimes, trying to get people to see how we need to approach space exploration in a philosophical way, really, to ask some of those questions like, how do we go about these activities in outer space? I presume these billionaires are going there for money, of course, to make money, to the detriment of the environment, perhaps, as we've seen on this planet. So definitely that is a continuous area of advocacy for me to keep on. Sometimes I'm like a broken record. Sometimes, yeah, I can sort of go on about the same things, but it is important, you know, trying to show
that's very big. I mean, that particular focus and concern is very pagan as well. I mean, that's exactly what pagans will tend to be concerned with, and will ask exactly the same questions there.
Well, and just switching gears slightly, I wanted to just get your ideas about, in a way, more towards astrology. Now I see, so I've got Astronism here, which is obviously what I belong to, and then I see astrology really as kind of like a cousin. It's sort of within the same family of ideas, but it's not quite, you know, the exact same as us. It's like a little cousin across over there. So would you say that astrology is a religion? Is it a belief system? What is it then? Is it a science? What is the consensus that we can really come to? Or is there a consensus?
I don't know if there is a consensus. It's not a science.
Okay.
I would say that much. Although the study of places like Newgrange and Stonehenge and all that, it's more archaeology, but that's a kind of a science.
Yes.
I don't see it as a religion, although it does. There are various assumptions that one makes,
Yes.
which are very similar to the kind of assumptions a faith position will take. So it's quasi-religious as opposed to being an actual religion. It's certainly not organized as a religion. But the people that I know who are practicing astrologers and do consultations for, you know, I mean, that's how they make their living. It's something that works for them.
Yes.
They see it and so when they were my students, that was really problematic for them because as a sociology and that type of a discipline, our whole purpose is to detach from what we're studying to the degree that we're not influencing, we're not getting the results that we personally want. We want to see what is the case. And that was hard for them to do because I think their own way of relating to the stars and the horoscope and so forth is highly subjective and meditative in many respects. So there are religious elements or spiritual elements involved on that basis. But then again, with people who are just looking at their horoscope column in the daily newspaper, that's not religion. I don't know what you really want to call that, but it's just something that people do, and it maybe gives you a structure, it maybe gives you some encouragement, or it might point out certain things that you should be particularly aware of. But usually things that we should always be aware of, but it brings to mind possibilities.
And opportunity to some degree.
Yeah.
What I also wanted to ask you as well was about really, we've sort of been fed this narrative, and it probably is true, that sort of religious belief and practice is going down, declining in the West, at least. Of course, that can be disputed in many ways, but it's a general consensus that is taking place. Would you say that because of that, people are now beginning to look at sort of more sort of alternative things like astrology, or do you not see any correlation there?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, that's a big debate, the whole secularization thesis. And I don't know if it's a consensus, but it's a pretty wide group of consideration that no, religion isn't declining. What is declining seems to be institutionalized religion to some extent, except that then you look at the evangelical movement and you look at Islam and things like that, and they're expanding and growing enormously. So there's a whole debate on that issue. But what the other argument is that with the decline of institutionalized religion, people are growing in different ways spiritually, and so they're examining more things. They're developing more personal understandings that work for themselves, and I think astrology can play a key role for a lot of people in that respect. It's I wouldn't say that's exclusive by any means, but it is one of the players in
Yes.
this kind of non-institutionalized spiritual reorientation.
Yes. Do we have any sort of figures on how many people are engaged with astrology? Do we know whether that be in the UK or the United States? Do we have any sort of hard figures on that? 'Cause it is difficult, I know, to try and get kind of figures on astrology, isn't it? As to
Yeah, that's hard. I think Nick Campion might have figures.
okay,
Uh, I mean, if you look at the world broadly, um, roughly 1/3 of the world are Christian oriented,
yes,
and roughly 1/5 of the world is Muslim oriented. So the two together are roughly half of the world's planets. You have maybe another fifth would be Dharmic, one sort, either Hindu or Buddhist or so forth. And you have another fifth, which are secular, who are either atheists or agnostic, maybe Marxist, but
mm,
uh, basically dismiss the whole idea of the supernatural.
yeah,
It doesn't make them unethical. That's the usual standard argument. But they are are freed from all those old traditions. And then probably between 6 and 10% of the world would be pagan.
right,
Um, our Western pagan tradition is really just a drop in the bucket. The largest number would probably be part of the Chinese culture, Taoism, and the classical uh, Chinese orientations, um, Afro-Latin, the movement, African religions,
mm,
uh, maybe Native American. Uh, you have these things exist. Our Western neo-pagan movement is really just a fraction of that
mm,
6 to 10%, but it still is a sizable number.
yes,
Now, where astrology would fit in or astronism, um, I see it largely overlapping with the others, at
okay,
least the secular and the pagan to a large extent. But I think probably a lot of Christians follow their horoscopes
yeah.
to some extent. So uh,
It's
I'd have to ask Nick Campion on figures now.
and that's the problem, isn't it, with the sort of demographics of religion. I mean, you know, I don't I sort of look at them and then I think, well, the world is in reality not that so defined, you know.
Yeah. Mm.
They're not quite helpful, I don't think, to be honest. To some degree they are, but it's like the census that we've done this year in the UK, you know, that's not that helpful because there's people, I mean, even myself, you know, I sometimes I go into a church if I feel like I want to do, you know,
Yeah.
and then, you know, but Catholic, do I really identify as that? It's not very helpful, is it? And maybe we need to get better at sort of giving people, I don't know, more opportunity to really explore their beliefs and register that, record that, you know.
I hope that is the case. I mean, the trouble is, I mean, within that whole mix, you have these kind of very strong fundamentalist
Yeah.
orientations,
Yes.
and they're not, they tend not to be conducive for cross conversations and explorations.
Yeah.
Um, and they seem to be quite strong. I mean, there's a certain appeal of that fundamental mental certainty in
Yes.
times of uncertainty. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people respond to that, and that speaks to them. So they're not going to just disappear.
Right.
Uh,
Yes. Of course. there'll
So
always be that fundamentalist base, won't there? That base.
I think so. I think so.
Mm.
Let,
Carry on, sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask as well, really, about sort of another category, really, that we've not spoke about yet is sort of new religious movements, which you could say Astronism is part of. Sometimes I classify that, you know, things that like Scientology, for example, whether we've got those types of religions. So do they overlap as well with paganism? Have you looked at those yet? Those sort of new religious movements?
Oh yeah, I mean that's my area is new religious movement. That's what I did my PhD on. So yes, I mean Scientology is not pagan. Most of them, paganism itself could be considered a new religious movement. That's true. It's drawing on the past, much like Astronism is drawing on the past. But let's face it, we're both vis-a-vis everything else that's been established. We're new, relatively new, and at least as a movement, as an organization. So the trouble is we have the sociologist has 4 classifications. Again, these are ideal types, but they have the church, the denomination, the cult, and the sect. And cult and sect are very loaded terms. A lot of sociologists don't want to use them because of the associations they have. But from a strictly sociological point of view, the church and the denomination are mainstream oriented. They're not innovative or non-mainstream. The difference between the church has very strict boundaries. It has the provisions for expulsion, for classifying someone as a heretic. The denomination is a fluid boundary thing where people can come and go. There's not the provision for expulsion and heresy judgments. And the cult and the sect conform to both of those, but they're non-mainstream. They're outside the mainstream orientations. The sect is the one that has the strict boundaries. You usually have a very strong charismatic leader very often, and strict rules of conformity. Whereas the cult is much more fluid. It's again innovative and nonconformist, but it's again fluid. It's up to the individual to decide whether they belong to it or not, or how much they want to participate in it, and so forth. So if you look at something like Scientology, it's much more of a sect orientation. It's non-mainstream, and it's also rather strictly bordered, has strict controls. The Moonies, what I would say would be the same, Unification Church. But within that, I would say that paganism is much more cultic. But again, you really can't just say paganism because there's so many different branches. And you have Wicca, you have Kemetic, you have the classical Greco-Roman, and so forth. And so they have areas of agreement, much like I think which the different branches of Astronism have, but they're also quite distinct and go their own way.
Yeah, that it's interesting. I suppose this is very relevant for me, of course, with being the founder of one. So I'm constantly thinking about this question. When someone accuses me of starting a cult or something like that, and I say that very seriously. But it's maybe that's what it is. Maybe that is what it is. Maybe that's what Astronism will turn out to be. Do you think that there is a what I've noticed with some new religious movements is that some fail, and obviously some are albeit struggling, but are still here, like Scientology, after the leader has died. So is there definitely a sort of process, you could say, that new religious movements have to go through, like an initiation type of process, where in order to get to this classification of religion, is there a process there that takes place?
Yeah, that's again another big sociological question, and it's that there is a term for it which I can't remember. I've been retired for a while now, so I forget all my academic terminology. But that process of continuance after your initial leader has died, and whether they have set up an institution to continue the organization.
Yes.
Sometimes a lot of them fail, a lot of them end with the death of their leader or shortly thereafter. Scientology so far has continued. I'm not really sure what's happening with the Unification Church. I think one of the children was more or less in charge, but I haven't heard that much about it. I think it still is continuing. Something like the Church Universal and Triumphant with the prophets. I think once she developed Alzheimer's, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and I think, as far as I know, the overall movement has disintegrated, and that's quite common. It depends again on the size, how successful they've been, and how much is at stake, whether they can continue or not. And since there's so much involved with a lot of these new religious movements, you have a lot of individual burnout at certain points, and that's something that you have to face. And but I mean, I think I was just thinking I wouldn't call it a cult or a sect. What you're doing, it's an orientation. It's I would say a quasi spiritual orientation. And I would leave it at that. And I will admit I was very impressed with your dissertation. I thought it was wonderfully written. What did mystify me to some extent was, I mean, you're very definitely creating something out of that. And the way I've understood dissertations, again, one's supposed to be detached and value neutral. And this is not a value neutral enterprise, but it was really well put together and delightfully written. So
Thank you.
I was impressed with that.
Yeah, I think that I'm always going to have an issue with that. I think it's always going to be my struggle is trying to detach myself from that, because I'm just so passionate about everything that I do, and I'm doing my PhD at the moment in freedom of religion. And of course, again, that is very much relevant to my own personal endeavor. I see really astronism as a personal endeavor. Of course, it's part of my career, but I do see it separate from my sort of official lecturing and academic career.
All right.
I am trying to distinguish between the two, but of course, it is always there in the background. And one thing I found, I mean, the next phase for astronism really is to gain recognition for its beliefs around the world. So I started to look at what restrictions governments place on gaining registration or recognition. And so that's my PhD area now, is looking at how do we
how does a new orientation get accredited or recognized?
Yeah, that's right. And
I mean, well, this is very pagan in this respect. I mean, this is what paganisms are facing all over.
yes.
I mean, I was able to create the first kind of pagan studies department in Bath.
Yes.
There's been a few since then. That one's basically gone. But just getting into academia, we were able to do it most successfully through conferences and through the American Academy of Religion and things like that. And that might be one consideration that for you
Yeah.
is to think of the AAR. With your dissertation itself, I mean, be a phenomenologist in your approach and bracket your own belief parts
Yes.
from, and so express what your belief thing is, but bracket that, and then the other parts, then look at it as objectively as you can, even self-criticizing
Yes.
as much as you can, and take it from there, because that's otherwise you could have trouble. I don't know. I don't know who's your supervisor.
It's Dr. Carl Morris is my supervisor for my PhD, and it was Dr. Niall Scott who did my dissertation last year. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I did try to sort of criticize what I was doing last year a little bit in terms. What I tried to do, I suppose, was try to give, I don't know, just kind of a rationale for this Astronic tradition, I suppose, that looking at, well, what does the Abrahamic tradition have? Well, it has obviously thousands of years of history. You know, what makes a religious tradition? What makes a tradition where there are different religions within it? Of course, you need different members of that. So I chose, obviously, astrology, star worship, I did a lot on as well. So I just kind of took that approach, really,
All right.
to look at what other traditions have and then say, does the Astronic tradition have this or does it not have this, you know?
All right. All right. That's one question I had was, I think you referred to 40,000 years of history or something like that with the,
Yes.
you have to be careful there because of course, prehistory is not history.
Okay, yes.
And so history really only comes once we start having written
Yes.
language. So it becomes interpretive. So just be careful on making that because someone will put you down on that basis. But and it's interpretive. And of course, pagans. I mean, the pagan traditions goes back really as far. And so your cave paintings can be interpreted from a pagan orientation as much as an astronomical one.
Yes.
So there's probably, well, I don't know. I mean, we have mythologies, and of course, you have mythologies in that are astro oriented as well. So they begin. I mean, most early cultures have some kind of written record, and they will be both interpreted as pagan spirituality, and it can be interpreted as astronomically oriented
Yeah.
spirituality, dealing with the heavens. So, so we're really kind of neck and neck in that long-term race. But
Yeah, and I suppose that's I'm not sure how much longer you've got to speak, but that wasn't another area that I wanted to discuss with you, because there does seem to be is the origins of religion, because there does seem to be this sort of, yes, this in a way, this race in a way, these different claims to the origins of religion, and of course that depends on how we are defining religion. And of course, different traditions have different origin stories. But then you've also got these these sort of new understandings coming along, like feminist understandings of the origin of religion, looking at sort of matriarchal gods and matriarchal religions. And then you've also got this psychedelic as well, which is another area, this psychedelic understanding of religion, putting it essentially down to inadvertent taking of substances that altered consciousness, for example.
consciousness, yeah.
So I do see my astronist theory as definitely alongside these others, and that's why I'm constantly trying to find new specimen to continue to add to the body of specimen I've already collected, to try and get to this. So what is your, I don't know how much you've looked at this, but what is your sort of understanding of the origins of religion then in this more prehistoric time, because I do get what you mean about the written history, but we do know that, well, it is interpretive. You are right, of course, but we do know that humans began to bury their loved ones, for example, began to create figurines, of course. There's some brilliant specimens out there. What is your view on this topic, I suppose? It's a big one. It's a big question, so I apologize.
All right. I mean, if there is a fundamental impulse, I think the human being is naturally prone to the experience of awe.
Yes.
And the heavens certainly are totally awesome, and the world and nature are awe-inspiring. A sunrise is one of the most magical moments there is. And so I think there's a kind of a natural impetus towards kind of a spiritual appreciation of the beauty that comes through the awesome. And I think within that context, then one recognizes the beauty, and so one wants to live a beautiful life to some extent. So that's where the whole ethical thing comes in. Along the way, you get certain people maybe who took more mushrooms than anybody else, or just were born this way, but they have a particular insight, and they will start organizing. And part of that organization is, again, a sociological thing, a bid for power. My supervisor was Peter Clark, and he did a lot of studies in South America and the Umbanda and Candomblé religions. And he saw those spiritual orientations as a means for women to gain some sort of power. The woman was basically disempowered in society as a whole, but through those particular spiritual orientations, they could become quite powerful and develop quite strong followings. So there are many, many different factors behind why an individual, including yourself, become have an insight that they want to share with others, that the others haven't developed on their own. Yes. So as this progresses, I mean, I have a whole theory on Christianity, and I basically trace it to Iran and the Magi. I think the Magi, I mean, Persia was always the enemy of Rome. And the Magi were incredibly powerful priests. When Cyrus the Great was in Egypt, he had murdered his brother, so his brother wouldn't claim the throne while he was away. The Magi got an imposter and put him on the throne, claiming to be Cyrus's brother. Well, Cyrus knew that this was not true, and he was coming back, but he died in Babylon before he got back. And then Darius came in and got rid of the usurper and became the, whatever they were, the king of Persia. And the Magi, he came in, brought in the whole Zoroastrian establishment. So the Magi were kind of basically eclipsed, and they created a festival called the Megaphonia, an annual slaughtering of the Magi. Well, the Magi turned around and claimed that Zoroaster was one of them. I mean, they were really super clever, and our whole term magus means power. So in spite of all that, they still were in place. And my theory is that they wanted to get to Rome. They used the Mithraic mysteries first, but the Mithraic mysteries were too oriented to Persia, so that wasn't really working. It was also only open to men. Rodney Stark has a whole very interesting theory that Christianity developed because it appealed to women, and it prohibited abortion, and it also it was common in those days, if you had an extra child or a child you didn't want, you exposed it. Well, the Christians were collecting these children, raising them as Christians, and because women were no longer dying now in Christian women were no longer dying in attempted abortions, they survived, and of course their children then were Christian, and so Stark sees Christianity basically as a female-oriented movement in its conception. I feel that the whole Christian development, you had your Magi visiting Christ. I mean, so there's the clue that there was a connection there. And I think it was their second attempt to try to conquer Rome, and they did. And so our whole Vatican and church and ecclesiastical system is a descendant of that influence. Now, this is just a theory. I can't prove it. But, but I forget where I was going with this, but you can see how religions are power plays. They play for control of a culture, and we see that again with Luther. We see it throughout so much of history.
And I think that in a way we're going into a new kind of era in a way where we're trying to now live without that, but there are other types of power plays taking place, whether religion or another type of belief system will come along and fulfill that same role. Maybe might take place, may not do. Very interesting to think about. But I one of the last questions I wanted to, or last areas that I wanted to focus on with you was just bringing it all the way back, bring it all the way to the front, to the forefront, really, to the contemporary, really, is again with Astronism. What I found really interesting is that from the very beginning, sort of 8 years ago, it's not been a global religion, but it has in a sense, because we were on social media and Twitter and all these, Facebook and things like that from the very start. So there's this really interesting phenomena that's taking place where, for example, like Astronism, it is available to everyone, the world, pretty much, if you're not living in North Korea, of course. But, there's a lot of interesting things that are taking place with regards to how religious or spiritual or philosophical beliefs are now being transmitted. I mean, I talk to people from all around the world, and we would never have spoken otherwise. There's people in Brazil and
exactly.
China.
I don't know what the ultimate I mean, obviously there are going to be consequences and changes from all that. I think it's almost too early for us to really predict what it's going to be. But I mean, if you just look at the street, I mean, everyone is communicating with somebody, almost all of them, and it amazes me because I mean that wasn't what I grew up with.
No.
But and so we're in a time where people are super communicating. Maybe what they're communicating, that's a whole other matter. But the fact is that that's what they're doing, and it's working not only just individually in one's own locality, but again globally. Yes. And I can communicate with my friends in California, on the continent, in India, Australia. I mean, that all those possibilities are there, and it's the same. I mean, the thing with the social media, of course, is the competition, because while you can communicate with all those thousands and thousands of other people who are doing the same thing, and there's only so much time. I find this whole thing overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. It is. It really is. I feel overwhelmed every day. So,
so that's when you should just step out and get away from it all and look at the heavens and just relax.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I love to do. Just before you go, I wanted to also ask as well about this sort of phenomenon of, related to this, is the phenomenon really of access to information. really interesting. So you can type into Google Christianity or Islam and learn pretty much everything about that religion, obviously from different perspectives, but some have said already that this type of access to information, I mean, you could just go to Wikipedia, for example, if you wish. This type of access to information is hurting religion in some ways, because in a way the kind of mystery is gone. The kind of you could say religions for quite a long time sort of were built on the idea of, if you progress further, you will receive more knowledge, or you will receive higher conditions, for example. So this sort of dissemination of information that we have from the internet, of course, would you say that it's kind of hurting sort of religions in that sense? Do you think, or do you think the opposite?
I think it's causing religions to adapt.
Right.
I think within that whole information overload, there is the possibility that it opens up new avenues for one to explore. Yeah. So it may emancipate someone from a more fixed position or previous position, but it has the potential now we could get locked in. I mean, I have a really militantly vehement anti-vaxxer family, and they have their own channels of information. I mean, it amazes me. And those are reinforcing and self-supporting and so forth. And the whole COVID thing is a hoax to them, and the vaccines have microchips, and it's all Bill Gates or anything. I mean, it's to me, it's amazing, and they're my family, they're loved ones. So there's that potential within this whole social media range of possibility, but there's also the more positive of opening things up.
It's really conspiracy, isn't it? Conspiracy on steroids in many ways. It's sort of this.
There's a new term that I've just come across, and it's called conspirituality.
Yeah.
And it goes into wokeism, or woke culture, and cancel culture, and all that. But I think we're going to hear a lot more of that term.
Yes, we are.
Or let me just tell you this. Let me just conclude then with, I was in the Sinai. I had this wonderful trip to Egypt, and so we were going to climb Mount Sinai.
Right.
And to do that, you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you start. And the idea is to get to the top of the mountain for the sunrise.
Yes.
So I mean, it was wondrously. I mean, the only time. Well, in Northern California in the past, I have seen the stars like that, and in the Sinai I have. But to be able to see the heavens so completely in such a pristine form is truly amazing. And so at some point, suddenly there was this very, very narrow shaft of light that just shot right up into the heavens. And we didn't know what it was. It was phenomenal. And very, very gradually, it kept widening. And then all of a sudden, in one instant, it became the whole light of the dawn. And that was my experience of the zodiacal light. I hadn't even known about it until then. But it was absolutely phenomenal experience, and really beautiful.
Yeah, so, and what no better way to end on that, really. What a great way to sort of finish this conversation. So I suppose the last thing to say really is thank you for having this conversation with me, and I hope that we will definitely have more in the future, hopefully, and keep in touch, of course.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed meeting you, Cometan, and good luck with all your ventures, and get that PhD. Just don't. One thing that was always told me is don't try to make it the most original PhD. Do what they want.
Yes.
Get the bloody degree, then you can do what you want. So just keep that kind of in mind.
I love that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I do very much like lecturing whenever I can get the chance. I do get a buzz off it. I love research, and I do know that my lecturers warn me that as you go further in, you might not have as much time for your own research, depending on how lucky you are. So I do know that. So I'm just kind of trying to enjoy this time now.
Definitely enjoy it. I mean, for me, it was some of the best times of my life was doing those studies. So just enjoy it. It goes much faster than you think, and it's going to be over before you know it. So.
Well, thanks for joining me, and thanks everyone for watching this episode of A Conversation with Cometan. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.